republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I would ask that we move the action items to the end of the meeting instead of right after the consent agenda.
That's fine. Anybody else have a problem with that?
Is that gonna coincide with this other timing?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Agenda approved. Minutes.
No, public comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the last workshop meeting and regular meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes approved. Now we go to public comment. Anybody would like this, Yvonne? Just in time.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Yvonne Proudstead from Springer Oak, Caledonia Township. At the work group session last Tuesday, there was discussion once again about the Highway Department building being constructed on the 22.3 acres adjacent to the school. In case you don't know or don't remember, almost 4 years ago, on August 4th of 2015, the board passed a motion to build at the current location. Excuse me. That decision was made after many meetings of a diverse group of citizens, as well as a school board meeting which included the Caledonia City Council and the Board of Commissioners. According to the minutes of that school board meeting on May 11th of 2016, quote, City Council member Burns stated that he would like to see an agreement in place with placing the county highway shop facility at the existing site and feels it is a workable solution, unquote. Another quote, Director Werner cautioned the county commissioners with overbuilding the shop, as you will need to find ways to maintain that building. In addition, and for your information, the commissioner who made the motion to use the existing location originally wanted to build on that 22 acres. Why do you think he changed his mind? Because it's not a good idea. Since that decision was made, there has been no progress, but now you want to reinvent the wheel and go through the information gathering process again? Are you simply going to dismiss the past board's decision? It's no wonder there's no progress, and in the meantime, costs continue to increase. If you insist on comparing sites and costs, you need to remember the following. 1, the current site already has utility infrastructure. The 22 acres has nothing. No power, no sewer, no water, no driveway, no access to Highway 76. How much taxpayer money has to be spent to get the new site ready to build? 2, if you don't use the current site, what will you do with it? Is all the pollution on the old site removed? If not, what is that expense? 3, what will the cost of excavation be at both sites? What circumstances or needs have changed since the decision was made to use the current site? And why would you now decide to go against community sentiment? Would any one of you want to build a new home adjacent to a highway shop? Just think about all the noise, dust, and truck traffic all day, then think about students trying to study with those distractions going on. Building on the 22.3 acres is simply not a good idea. As stated by Commissioner Walter on May 17th of 2016, she expressed her agreement that the site adjoining the school is not viable for a highway department building. Thank you.
Yvonne, would you like to submit that copy of that for the minutes? Since you have it written?
She doesn't need to.
Okay. Okay.
Any other public comment? If not, we'll,
Could I,
yes, go ahead, Fred.
Yvonne, since that meeting, which was a work group session, which is obviously open to the public, we talk about a lot of things at those sessions that may or may not happen, and there's been quite a bit of internal research done since then, and I expect that some of that will come out later in the meeting. We're not, it's not that we aren't listening, it's not that we aren't trying to do the right thing, it's just that at that point in time, we wanted to talk about a lot of different things about that particular business, and so we did. And there's
It was just an
quite a
open,
bit that's
open
happened.
discussion.
It was just an
No-
open discussion. There's nothing set in cement at all at this point, so.
response to that, why don't you go with the former board's decision and not even consider that?
Yvonne, we were just having an open discussion, so we're not gonna have a debate right here now about it.
No.
It was just an open discussion on options out there, so. We were freely talking, so. Anything else? Okay, consent agenda. You've had a chance to look at the consent agenda. Is there anything in there that, well, first of all, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move approval. Get it
Second.
going.
Second.
Any discussion on the consent agenda?
I do have a question with regard to item 7, the affirmed personal actions. A4, the hiring of Kurt Zender and Brett Levin, 67-day sheriff's deputies, C42, step 1, effective for the water patrol. Only question I had is there a conflict of interest with the Caledonia City Chief of Police being on the Sheriff's Department Water Patrol?
Has that happened before?
My understanding is, yes, it's happened before. So,
It was just a question.
It's a good
I mean,
question.
He's the chief of the city police, he's on salary, so on duty virtually all the time. If an emergency situation arises, is there a conflict when he's water patrolling? It's my only question.
all right.
Good question.
If
It's a valid
not an
question.
issue-
We do have, there are other employees that have worked for other departments as well, as post-board certified. And of course, we are very insistent that they're either on our clock or their clock. It's not a matter of being on both.
The city hires sheriff's deputies as
Yep, as
substitute
augmentees as
employees.
well, yep.
Sheriff's Department has hired city police officers.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking a full-time salaried position. I just don't know if there's a conflict there or not.
Okay.
If not, then I have no problem with it. I mean, he's a qualified officer and whatnot. I'm just curious about the conflict.
Well, with that being said, do you wish to pull that, or would
Well, it would be interesting that if something occurred on that day that the city would expect him to respond to. Do they bring the boat in and let him off,
So
or?
he can cruise back up to California.
Or does he automatically have coverage from somebody else for city things when he's on patrol?
I would think that would
And
be the
I would
case.
assume that would be, yeah.
If he's on the water, he's got somebody else and take coverage for him.
As long as the chain of command is there.
Yep.
And and with communications, I would think that would be still there.
That was the only
Do
question
we-
that came up to mind.
I guess the
I will
question
make,
is,
if you wanna press with this today, I will make sure that in practice it is addressed. I'm sure it is, I just
yeah,
can't speak to the specifics of it, but
yeah.
I'll have that conversation with the sheriff and make sure that that's resolved.
Yeah,
As long as it's not an issue, I'm okay with it.
yeah. I guess as long as the question is being asked of the city and the sheriff, why, yeah, not a problem for me.
Okay, I have a question on the reassignment of William Hargrove from deputy sheriff to sergeant.
Mhm.
Is there a rationale, or are we filling something, or just
No.
creating something?
Well, this is the 2 sergeant positions that were created a while ago, in replacement of the lieutenant position. And so now we've done a external and an internal search to fill that position, and the vacant deputy billet when Travis Latham left. So this is an internal promotion to fill one of those sergeant roles, and there'll be another action at a future meeting to fill our other vacancy. We're just not ready to make it firm.
All right,
I also just wanna point out on number 4, the appointment of Brad Felton to the position of the Crooked Creek Watershed. Maynard Welsher's retired after 26 years. We should acknowledge his service for the Crooked Creek Watershed on that.
yeah, that's dedication.
Yep. Anything else?
No, sir.
All those approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Consent agenda approved. Okay, we moved from the action items to the end, so now, being the 9:42, it's close enough. We could have Kevin from MCIT come and do his presentation.
So you should have a copy of my presentation that you can follow along. My name is Kevin Walfans. I'm the Director of Field Services for MCIT. I have under me our risk management consultants. We do not have agents. Our risk management consultants serve that role as well as provide other consultative services, and then also our loss control consultants.
Kevin, can you pull the mic a
Kevin,
little closer?
could you, yeah, pull
Loss
the mic a
control
little
consultants
closer there.
that provide consultative services to try to help prevent claims from occurring. So I oversee that group. The presentation I have today, I am just going to kind of highlight some of the items here. I am not going to read it to you with the exception of one section. I recognize you can read. And we'll actually take questions throughout the presentation, so if you have them, feel free to ask. The MCIT is celebrating their 40 years of success, and Houston County has been with us since the 1980s, so a long-term, long-standing member. I always enjoy coming to Houston County. My wife is from Houston. I was married in Houston County, and I carry a ring from Bubber's Jewelry on me every day for the last 24 years. So I always enjoy coming down and speaking before this board. The Minnesota Counties Intergovernmental Trust has 81 of the 87 counties as members, and we have about 350 plus associated members, which include historical societies, soil and water conservation districts, county fairs, those types of other organizations. We have all lines of coverage, and again, are celebrating our 40th year, which is it's a huge milestone. Just a real bit of history there. The insurance trust was formed after the standard markets basically canceled all insurance for public entities or made them cost prohibitive. And so throughout the country, if you look at any pooling organizations, you'll see that they often or most commonly have formed in that same time window when that market basically disappeared for public entities. And that was due to the high risk associated with things like law enforcement, highway, was 24-hour operations. And so, again, county commissioners, your predecessors came together to form our organization. We are a joint powers entity again, so we are a governmental entity, and so we understand what you do and how you do it, and really try to support all of our county members in their operations and preventing losses and controlling risk. A couple of things talks about the success of the program for reducing frequency and severity of claims, supporting of some of our loss prevention strategies, mitigating claims, and I would also add a bullet point there, commitment to the program and not viewing our services as a commodity. Okay, so on to the second page, on the left-hand side talks about contributions and dividends. In the pink box, it talks about rates have decreased since 2010, 30% for property casualty and 32% for workers' compensation coverage. That speaks not only to the market or the reinsurance market, but it also speaks to our members' reduction in claim activity, so that we're able to receive less contribution in order to cover those exposures. Everyone's favorite topic on the bottom left corner in the green is the dividend. And MCIT does pay a dividend. We have paid a dividend consistently for the past, I believe, 30 years. Prior to that, we actually had a case where we had to go and ask for additional contribution to cover some of our exposures. Our board is committed not to put ourselves in that position in the future. That being said, we also do not collect additional rates just to give a dividend. Contribution looks forward, dividends look backwards. So we look forward to see what we need to cover the potential or anticipated exposures. We look backwards to see what we can give back to the members based on, often it is dividend on an income from the investments. This is the one piece I'm going to read just because I think it's really important. It says, dividends reflect MCIT's past claim experience and its performance of its MCIT investments. MCIT only issues a dividend when it's actually sound and fiscally approved. You'll see there that the county has received $94,000 in 2018 in dividends, which is, I think, a very healthy number, and I think greatly assists our members again. Our goal is also to have rate stabilization so we don't have peaks and valleys because we recognize that our membership needs to do budgets far in advance. And so we really try hard to anticipate what our exposures are going to be, what the market's going to do, including investment in the reinsurance market, to try to make rates as contributions as stable as possible. In the center of the middle page talks about MCIT coverage, property and casualty claims, and you can see how this is how it breaks out for the trust as a whole. You'll see that auto is our most frequently reported, and actually it's our most severe type of exposure. Driving automobiles is one of the most dangerous things that everyone does as an individual, and people do as their employment. And so that, again, that's reflected in the frequency and severity of claims. We do not provide the county's individual experience because we don't do that simply because it's often skewed if there's one bad claim or something. But if there's additional information needed, I can provide that. The bottom of the page talks about the workers' compensation claim experience. Again, this is the trust as a whole. You'll see that sheriff jail operations account for the most frequent and the severe of the claims, followed by highway. And again, this is to be anticipated due to the nature of the operations and the fact that both of those operations are typically 24-hour-a-day operations. The bottom of that middle section talks about the workers' compensation modification rate. If you're familiar with that, you'll know that the modification rate is the multiplier that is applied to the base rate of the contribution. The mod factor is determined based on past claim experience. The mod of 1 is considered average or the anticipated losses. Currently, the mod rate for the county is 1.029, so it's on track for what would be anticipated as average type of claims. Okay, moving on the right-hand side, the light blue column talks about notable coverage enhancements for 2019. Often we'll have just minor enhancements, but in 2019 our board recognized that we have additional needs from our membership regarding several different categories, including an increase in the data compromise and Cyber1 coverage limits. Also, builder's risk sublimits have increased by $250,000, and contents has increased by $50,000. We have additional coverage for drones. Prior to 2019, drone coverage was available for law enforcement activities only. Due to the now good claim experience and the maturing of the drone industry, if you will, we have now been able to offer that to our members for all of their drone needs. So a lot of the ditch inspections, bridge inspections, those types of operations are now being explored to be done with drones. And so again, we're looking to add our coverage to match our members' needs. Just a quick aside, the coverage or the rate for charging for a drone is based on weight of the drone, which is a very interesting model, but was basically something that was determined that is the most correct way to determine what the exposure of a drone is. Electric data processing equipment coverage was enhanced. This was really to help assist our members that have voting equipment that is in transit. We're finding that the coverage that we had prior was not adequate when you have a truckload of equipment driving around the county being dropped off at the various polling stations. So that was enhanced for 2018. And then the final enhancement I want to talk about is the Class 3 dam coverage. We now have coverage for Class 3 dams. Prior to 2019, that was excluded. Class 3 dams are dams that have a very low exposure downstream. I guess I can't tell you if you have any Class 3 dams here. You'll have to talk to your highway engineer. But again, prior to 2019, we did not have any coverage for that. Okay, moving on to the last page, talks about our consultative services and some of our resources that we have available to all of our members, either at no charge or at a very nominal charge, including a risk management consultative services. Our risk management consultants can not only answer questions about the coverage document and how it would respond in the event of a loss, but more importantly, how it may not respond in the event of a loss. Also, a lot of their role includes reviewing contracts and joint power agreements from a risk management perspective. We recognize that county attorneys are often busy or may not have the time or expertise to look at a contract from a pure risk management standpoint, in that it may be a completely legal contract, but may not be written as favorable for the county's interests as we would advise. And so we do offer that as a no-charge service and would really encourage the use of that service. I mentioned before loss control. Brian Dowdy, our loss control consultant, is here on a routine basis working with your staff and trying to help mitigate losses, identify loss trends, exposures, and provide just any assistance that we can provide, including written resources to help facilitate the county's efforts in reducing losses, especially on the workers' compensation or the employee side. The green box talks about the Employee Assistance Program. If you're familiar with the Employee Assistance Program, which is administered by Sand Creek, that is something that we provide to all of our members. So everyone here on the board is covered by that Employee Assistance Program, as well as immediate family members. We find that this is a good risk management tool in that not only does it help our member employees reduce their stressors that could negatively affect their employment, which could lead to claims or injuries, but it also helps prevent those losses and the dollars associated with those. We like to see a utilization rate of at least 4%. That tells us that we're getting our money's worth. We prepay for this service, so it's whether you use it or not, we still pay a fee. Currently, Houston County is at 2007 it was 5%, 2018 was just under 3%, which I think tells me that the program is being advertised and utilized to some degree here in the county, so I really commend that. Again, all elected officials, sheriff's office employees, and all other employees are eligible for this service. We have specialized counselors based on the need and the type of person that needs that type of assistance. Confidential, no charge, and then it's also in this region, so they would find a counselor that is close to where that people live. Real quick, training for officials and employees. We provide several workshops, on-site presentations, some online training, tutorials, defensive driver training, all available again at no charge or reduced charge. We do or will be presenting at the AMC regional meeting. We're going to be presenting on jail suicide prevention, jail suicide topic. Finally, in the blue box on the bottom, we have a few notes here. We really like to encourage commissioners to support any safety initiatives that you have going on in the county. Attend the trainings for risk management and safety efforts. Support and encourage training and education for employees. Learn how the coverage applies prior to making decisions, which is always helpful in the decision-making process. Reviewing contracts from risk management perspective, which I mentioned before, and then engaging with MCIT. So with that, on behalf of the MCIT board and staff, I'd like to thank Houston County for being a member of MCIT, and again allowing me to come and present before the board today.
Well, a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
The portion on commissioners, I believe I saw recently looking for a board member.
Correct. So we do have a board opening, and you should each receive a mailing on that. The applications are due, I think, fairly soon if you have interest in that.
Is that a compensated position or strictly volunteer?
It is a compensated position, and I think there's some per diems associated with that. Yes.
And then going back for a moment to the workman's comp claim effect, we're slightly over the 1 target, so that costs us $3,000 something yearly.
Sure. So it costs you. Well, I guess I don't have the numbers in front of me.
3,200.
It says down at the bottom, yeah,
3,233.
I don't have the total amount, but yeah, that would be the additional cost.
So that's based on our previous year's history of workman comp
Right.
claims, is that,
Right.
okay?
Now, and I would add that if you look at the 2018, it was 0.73. That means that you were paying, what's the difference there? That's 27% less than average. In 2018, you're paying, 25% less in 2017. So this year you're paying, 2% more than average.
All right.
And there's a look back year, and there's a green year, so you don't look at the most previous years, and it's 3 years prior. So if good years fall off and bad years come on, that's what rises the mod rate. and it's reversed too. If bad years fall off and good years come on, then you're moderate dip. So it doesn't move dramatically, it moves consistently, or slowly, I should say.
All right, thank you.
So with regard to the coverage for drones, is the sheriff's posse drone then covered by MCIT, or is that an independent?
My understanding was they were gonna have that, covered independently.
Yep.
Okay, that's not an issue. And with Brian sitting in the back, what's a class 3 dam?
It's a low-risk dam that essentially it's like in a rural area, you have those roadways or, far into buildings beneath it that's,
So is this like a watershed type dam? The
So-
earthen dam?
yeah, so I was just looking at Dam Finder DNR's website and dams. So in our county, the county does not have any dams. Crooked Creek Township, or Crooked Creek Watershed has several dams, and Red River Water Conservation District has, I believe, 3 dams. So I'm not.
But they're not county dams.
But they're not county, so I'm not sure how soil water plays into the insurance side of things, but otherwise, we don't have any other county side.
And the highway department doesn't have a drone, do they?
We do.
Or do you? Okay. And that's covered by MCIT, I would assume.
Real quick, a little more on dams. So if one of our covered SWCDs were to provide consultative services on a class 3 dam, such as inspections, then our coverage would extend to inspection. And I think that was a little bit of the reasoning why that coverage was added, is some of the operations of our associated members.
Great.
Anything else? Well, if not, thank you, Kevin.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Sean Markham presentation on
Solar energy.
solar energy. Well, I was gonna say, you don't, I don't think
look a lot like it.
You're not being his sub, huh?
Morning. Yeah.
John, we'll set you up right up here. This is Sean Markham, our commissioners,
Morning.
County Administrator Jeff,
Morning, Sean.
now let, have, Mr. Martin just share his background a little bit and experience with you, and then, has a presentation, and there's some information. Just the general information, I thought it'd be helpful for us to have some sense of what the, possibilities might be, as well as what some of the challenges might be. And Sean, so,
Perfect. Let's see. Is that on now? No. Maybe now?
There.
Here you go.
There you go. So my name is Sean Markham. I've been in renewables for about 15 years, going on 16 years. The first 10 of that was in wind, and the last 5 has been more focused on solar, as there's been a lot of consolidation in the wind industry, and so there's less projects to buy. Solar being a little bit newer, there's more stuff to buy. All for those 15 years, I've mainly been in a construction-related role where I was either, project managing work in the field, or I was the VP of Project Management and Construction for a large wind turbine manufacturer, and now I run the, kind of call it the EPC program for a large IPP, which is IPP is just a term for like an independent power producer. It's the folks that are signing PPAs with the different utilities. So I had quite a bit of exposure in the industry. I probably built about a little over 1.5 gigawatts now of solar from Jamaica to California, Connecticut, through the Midwest, and including this project called North Star in Minnesota, which is the biggest Midwest solar project in one contiguous site, outside of one other project that's in Colorado. Otherwise, you got to go all the way to basically the West Coast. But I've been talking to Tess for a while, and Tess asked if I could put together a small presentation and just kind of go over what could possibly be done in Caledonia for solar, either you know, through the city, through the school, etc. And so that's what I'm down here to speak about today. Any questions so far? All right. So to make things maybe just a little bit easier, I just want to run through some quick definitions, just because I think that it's helpful, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, and then I think everybody's got a copy of the printed presentation too. But modules are mounted on rack, and you either have like a fixed tilt rack, which is generally it's something that's facing due south, and it's at about a 30 to 35 degree angle. Sometimes they'll go down to like 25 degrees, which creates less shading. And so the racks kind of go like this. They run east and west and then face to the south. The other rack is a single axis tracker, which they run north and south, and they face the east in the morning, and then they follow the sun throughout the day, and they end in the west. The modules, for projects like this, you would use the typical 72 cell module from the, call it a utility grade. It's the most common module, probably 90% of the modules produced are based on that. There's some higher wattage modules that are used in Resi and C&I, but they're considerably more expensive, and it just makes it much more difficult to pencil something at this level for utility scale. On that note, one important thing, a lot of people have probably heard in the news about Trump and tariffs and that. Right now, modules are priced probably 15 cents higher. Some of that came from Obama-era anti-dumping tariffs against Chinese, or against the Chinese. From that point on, the Chinese, to help counteract that, they actually built plants in South Asia as well as Canada. And then 2 years ago, Trump instituted the 301 tariffs, which was another tariff put on solar modules, which was meant to get out of, or a way to combat the fact that the Chinese had built now these manufacturing facilities outside of China, which has resulted in actually the Chinese now building factories in the United States. So the reason that maybe that's somewhat important is a lot of people ask about whether or not there's US modules or made in US modules. But generally speaking, the U.S. left that business probably, for the most part, they kind of left that business about 5-6 years ago. So now granted, a lot of the R&D is still from the U.S. There's a lot of R&D in Europe where it started, but the bulk of the heavy lifting from the manufacturing side has been in Asia, and it's been there as a way to drive out costs and make solar more competitive with other forms of generation.
On the single axis tracker, that's the most efficient, isn't it?
Correct, it produces the most. A fixed tilt rack in southern Minnesota probably produces about 1,300 kilowatt hours per kilowatt of DC capacity installed, whereas a single axis tracker is between 1,425 and 1,450, so it produces a little bit more.
Are they a little more expensive because of that, or?
They're a little bit more expensive. Maybe a penny or two a watt more expensive to build, but there is more maintenance. And probably the biggest downfall to using a single axis tracker on a smaller scale project is truck rolls. If you have an issue with snowfall or lightning strikes or something like that, could knock out a controller, and then you have to go out and fix it. So in like a large utility scale project, where you'd have full-time O&M staff, it's not a big deal, because the guys roll in at 7 o'clock every morning and they're there all day to fix stuff. But if you have, you know, a small project located, you know, say down here, but the O&M provider is out of Minneapolis or out of Rochester, then they would have to roll a truck and drive out, and it just takes longer and it's more expensive to keep them up and running. So there are some trade-offs from it. But the additional generation sometimes does look pretty appealing, and from a finance perspective, so it's getting the investors comfortable that, you know, single axis tracker is not going to take a lot of extra time to manage and maintain.
Yeah, I just noticed on Blue Horizon Energy, I believe, or something, they had estimates on, and those were all single axis track. They were always over their estimates on output.
On output, they have dual access, right? Blue
Yeah.
Horizon?
Yeah.
I think they're the big squares.
Yep.
Yeah, those are dual access. They produce even more yet than a single access, but they are a fair amount of maintenance. They're even more maintenance than a single access tracker. And on the utility side, the utility space has basically moved away from them because of that.
Okay.
So the inverter is what changes the DC power that comes out of the module into AC power that we can use. They come in central inverters and string inverters. The central inverters are very large. They come skidded about the size of a shipping container. They're only used on large utility scale projects. And then inverters go all the way down to like a 4 kilowatt, which is what you would maybe put on your house for residential if you had like a city home or something like that. Up to now, which is what I have modeled in a proposed cost concept, this 250 kilowatt string inverter, which is new for SunGrow. It's a new offering from SunGrow next year. And it helps with competitiveness, because the price per watt or kilowatt to procure and install it is quite a bit less. Then kind of shifting a little bit from the technology to the people, you know, generally speaking, there's 2 entities, sometimes 3 entities, depending that are in the process. The developer, and that's the guy that they're the party that comes up with the idea. They're usually the ones that are securing the land, they're securing a PPA or a power purchase agreement. They're working with the local, regional, and state authorities to get the permitting and that involved. And then they're typically selling that project, or in a lot of cases that project is sold to what would be, or what's normally referred to as a sponsor, and they're the ones that are owning the project then for the long term. Sometimes the terms are interchangeable. And then project funding and capital stack. The typical capital stack is about 40% tax equity. So you'd find a partner on a large utility scale project. It's the big banks, and they're investing in about 40% of the cost of the system in return for the tax benefits that come out of it. About 40% of the capital stack is debt. Go to a bank, get 15, 20, 25-year term debt, and then about 20% is sponsor equity. And so when you talk about like a return on investment, in that the return is basically on the sponsor equity. Kind of covers that. So maybe quickly, next to the ITC. So there's a lot of discussion about the tax benefits associated with it. The 2 big tax benefits are ITC and depreciation. ITC is the investment tax credit, which after this year steps down 4%, and then it continually steps down over the next several years until it just ends at 10%. But ITC is the vehicle similar to the PTC, which was the production tax credit, that's used to help spur investment in renewable energy. So as a sponsor, you would build a system, and you would get back in tax savings for building the system 30% of the installed cost. So it costs $1, you get 33 cents off your tax liability. So if you built a $100,000 project, and you would see $33,000 worth of tax benefit out of that from the ITC, and say you owed, the entity or the sponsor entity owed $33,000 in federal taxes, then they wouldn't owe anything, because the 33,000 in ITC would wash out the 33,000 that you would owe in tax. The second part of that is depreciation, and depreciation is just the same as any other depreciation, with the exception of, because the ITC is actually greater than normal depreciation, if you were to kind of pencil it out, the authorities have said that you can only depreciate 85% of the cost of the system. And so you could, and then under some law, I think it was probably in the 90s, they passed a renewable energy law that allows you to do makers, which is basically you can take a renewable energy project and depreciate it out over 5 years or 6 years, whereas the normal project or normal depreciation is probably in the 20 to 30 range, depending on what it is. So it allows you to recapture, from a tax perspective, you're recapturing your investment much faster. Landowners, I think everybody, that's pretty self-explanatory. The landowner is typically the host site for like a residential or C&I type project. It's usually just at the host site. The host site is, the landowner, the sponsor. They're usually providing the tax equity and all that because it's a smaller project. On larger projects, a developer would go to a farmer or a large landowner and acquire land. Preference is usually to purchase, but a lot of times landowners are now more wanting to hold the land to reduce their tax burden of selling it all at once and paying all the capital gains. Plus, for them, it works out to be like a nice 30-year annuity, because most lease agreements for land is set at about 30 years. Typically in the Midwest, the larger project, the annual lease payments are between $700 and $1,200 an acre, and that kind of depends on where the project's at, proximity to a transmission line to connect it in, or proximity to offtake, and then the value of offtake. There's been a lot of discussion about the community solar gardens, and because the community solar gardens that Xcel Energy has are feed-in tariff, the money that the developer makes off of it is a little bit higher, which means then that at the end of the day, the developer can also pay the landowner a little bit more money to lease that land. So on the community solar garden side, you probably see something much closer to $1,200 an acre. On a large scale utility side, you're seeing stuff much closer to $700 an acre for an annual rent payment to the farmer. And then typically that's, the developer is also paying any increase in property taxes, and then a small escalation payment of 1 to 2% per year. Offtake is it's the sale of the produced energy, typically, and then the party off-taking it. The off-taker is typically a utility. Sometimes there's a few private entities that'll do deals with schools where they'll put it on a school property, and then they'll sign a PPA with the school, and then the school will pay them for it, and then they save the energy on their bill with the utility. Otherwise, most of it's just directly with the utility. And then probably of some value in the state of Minnesota is net metering. Net metering is a concept where it's almost like a battery, but in Minnesota they passed a rule where you can have up to a 40 kilowatt system, and the utility that you're interconnecting with has to pay you back the applicable retail rate for anything that you overproduce. And so what's nice about that is solar produces a lot more in the summer than it does in the winter. So you can take all your excess generation that you have in the summer, and you can roll it over into the winter months, so that maybe you can either break even, or in a lot of cases, probably a standard house is about 10 to 12 kilowatts of a system. If you put in about, say, a 25 kilowatt system, then you would actually get a check every year from the utility, and they have to pay you out at what the applicable retail rate is, which is typically whatever they're charging you, less like a fuel modifier, but it kind of depends on how the breakdown is. But it's beneficial, but it is very size limited. If you're an Xcel, Ottertail, and the guys out of Duluth, I forget their name right now, but they're IOUs, or investor-owned utilities. They fall under a different category. They have to actually net meter up to 1 megawatt. The rest of the utility space in Minnesota is either municipal utility or co-ops, and they're limited, or they only have to follow up to 40 kilowatts. Demand and peak, because I think demand and peak are very important. That's probably most important, I think, in the residential or in the CNI space, more in the CNI space because of net metering in Minnesota. But I think it's important to understand a little bit about demand and peak, because there's a lot of discussion, or a lot of people will make claims that I guess like aren't really the truth. So demand and peak refer to the cost of energy. Peak being you might actually pay more for your energy over a certain time of year. Usually you have, you know, either an afternoon peak energy cost, or you have a summer peak energy cost. It's usually related to, you know, air conditioning, or maybe it's related to when you're manufacturing. And demand is the total cost, is the amount of energy that you're drawing at any instantaneous time. It's almost like a water hose if you think about it, and going back to like gallons per minute. So you pay, even though in a particular instance, call it for 1 hour, one afternoon in a month, you're consuming 250 kilowatts, but the rest of the month you're consuming less, you would still pay to the utility this 250 kilowatt demand charge. So reason why I think that this is important is a lot of times maybe people will state that you can help curb demand or peak with renewable energy, solar or wind. Wind, it's maybe a little bit easier. Solar, it becomes pretty difficult without a battery, because you would, under most circumstances, that demand charge is based on a month. And so you basically have to have the sun shining every single day for that month in order to be able to get out of that demand charge, or have a demand curve that's in such that you'd never have that either early in the morning or late at night when the sun's not shining. I think it's important because, like I said, sometimes you can think that you're gonna maybe save a bunch of money on demand or peak charges, but it actually becomes somewhat difficult to save a lot of money on demand charges with renewable energy.
Sean, okay, quick, CNI?
Oh, commercial and industrial. So kind of solar's, you know, kind of residential, what you would put on your own house. Commercial and industrial. Residential probably like works for farmers too, like smaller 40 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt systems. CNI, commercial industrial, would be you know, like a large rooftop array or something similar that you would have for a school. And then utility would be a multi-megawatt project. And then, you know, some of the municipals and co-ops, you can kind of go back and forth between CNI and utility, but it's more of a, to some degree in the industry, it's more of a reference to where it's placed, but also just a reference to kind of a price guideline, because, you know, residential being the highest cost solar to install, and utility being the lowest cost solar to install.
Thank you.
So I looked at, in discussions with Tess, looked at a couple of different ideas for Caledonia. I know that Houston County owns a parcel of land north of the school, and then the school itself also owns a fair amount of power, or a fair amount of land that could possibly host in a corner, which I have in the next slide. And then also in talking with the city municipal, I've understood that that kind of the minimum load is about 500 kilowatts. And why that's kind of important is, again, the way that the city is buying its power from My Energy, they can't net meter either because it's over 40 kilowatts. And so you want to try and size a system so that you're not over the minimum load, because then you're basically giving the power to My Energy for, you know, 2 cents or whatever the avoided cost is, probably through Dairyland, set by Dairyland cooperative power. So 500 kilowatts seems to be roughly in where it's at. A project of that size, you would overbuild a little bit on fixed tilt because it produces less. You could build a little bit smaller array with trackers, but at about 500 kilowatts AC on a size, you can come out with something that produces about 960,000 kilowatt hours per year, which would be the generation. It consume about 4.5 acres. So here are kind of, the space is roughly the same, but the way it lays out, you'd have on the left a single axis tractor, obviously on the right fixed tilt. These are both about 4.5 acres in the county land north of the school.
How many acres?
About 4.5.
Okay.
4.5.
Oh,
and that,
I see, I can read it.
yeah, well, it all kind of depends on where you also count the land. So sometimes you get forced into renting land that's in a setback, even though you can't use it, you still have to pay for it, or you're counting the land inside the fence, et cetera. But I think 4.5 is a good size for something like this, and that gives you enough row spacing to minimize the shade. And since we're not land constrained, other than just paying more for the land, you're better off to increase space. The other option is, this is Google Earth imagery from a couple years ago, so there could be something now built, but in the southwest corner of the school, it appears that there is the potential to host something small there. Either system would be easiest connected to a new service provided by the municipal. So to bring in like a 480 volt system, and you'd connect right to it, and then figure out a way to either net meter from that or just do a direct purchase agreement right with the city would be the kind of the concept. You could connect this system back to the school, but then you're trying to get all the way back to where the school service is. It'd be easier for the school to just put in a new service and then have a combined billing statement in this scenario. Same thing with, depending if you did it through like the county on the county land, the same thing. The county would be better off putting in their own service there, and then you'd combine the bills. So you kind of net meter through a concept of this bill is always making money and this bill is always costing you money, and then you kind of roll it together and you get that net metered effect. This is a general buildup of cost. This is an example based on what modules, inverters and stuff like that cost today. You know, expectations for labor, expectations from both material suppliers and from labor suppliers. The market currently is pretty hot because of the solar gardens, and ITC stepped down and PTC stepped down and stuff like that. There's a lot of work in renewable energy at the moment, and that's also helped to drive up the cost a little bit on top of tariffs. But this is a general cost. A single axis tracker would be a little over $1, and a fixed tilt system would be a little under $1 a watt installed. As that relates to probably like a residential system, that's about half the cost. As it relates to like a very large scale utility system, this is probably about 20 cents higher. And this is probably pretty consistent with what you have with the CNI, with the exception of, in this scenario, you can be a little bit more competitive than CNI because you're putting it on the ground and you're not putting it on a roof. A lot of CNI projects are on rooftops, which ends up being a little bit more expensive. All of your cabling has to be encased in conduit. You're tying off all the time and stuff like that. You're moving material up onto the roof. It's just a more complicated, costly bill.
So this total bill cost of $704,000, that's off that like 4.5 acres?
Correct.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, these all kind of go together from, back here, this concept of like a 700 kilowatt fixed tilt, 600 kilowatt tracker. Both of those would go into a 500 kilowatt AC size system, and produce about 960,000 kilowatt hours per year. So the rest of this kind of goes through that concept size. This is an example model, and what I did in this model was I took what I was told are costs for the city from buying energy from My Energy and when the peak times are, and running it through this thing called a 12 by 24, which is, so you get 8,760 hours in a year. You can model this. It'll tell you how much energy you get out of every hour. That goes into a big spreadsheet. You can then extrapolate that into what's a 12 by 24, and so that tells you how much energy every hour of every month in a smaller table, and then you can take and extrapolate data out of that to let you know what hours of the year are peak, off-peak, and different. So this is broke down into those 3 columns as, the summer peak hours, from a production standpoint, what would be produced summer peak, what's winter peak, and what's off-peak, and then the applicable rate that I had or was told the cost would be. And so you see that this doesn't have the total generation, but if you added up the summer peak hours, the winter peak hours, the off-peak hours, you get close to that 950. There's not a lot of summer peak hours because it's only 3 months in the summer and it's in the afternoon, but it is helpful. I ran a quick analysis to see how much money you would save if you could just eliminate the peak rate. And so you would say on this model, the off-peak rate is just shy of 5 cents, and over the 25, it's not a great savings, but over the 25-year life of the project, if you just eliminated the peak rate and kept everything flat, so there's no escalation in the power price, there's about $110,000, $120,000 worth of energy savings that you would have by buying all your energy at the 5 cent rate for the next 25 years.
I had already done all this before.
Okay.
So.
Perfect.
My question is, for the stretch we've been having now, for instance, how do you factor the sun over a 3-month period when it's so unpredictable? I don't.
Sure. So the model that produces the conceptual energy. So you put this in. This stuff came out of a program called Helioscope, which is a big C&I residential type program. It uses this TMY data, which are these weather sets. It's been collected at airports. I'm not positive what local TMY station this data came from for Caledonia. I could look it up, but it's then based on an average, and every year that average changes a little bit. So then on the utility scale side, you would use this program called PVSYST, which doesn't allow you to lay out the modules, but you do like Helioscope does, but it tends to be the data you can upload data into it a little bit better. So you can upload a little bit more refined OND file, which is the file for the inverter, or a PAN file, which is the production profile for the module, and you can always update the TMY data. So it always increases or it always changes over time because you're just adding like another year into the data set and dividing it out to get the average. What is interesting, and just came out in an article that I was reading the other day, is that when you compare the gist of it is how you compare it to wind, you would finance on what they call like a P50 and a P99. Probability 50% of the time, probability 99% of the time. And what they are finding out is that solar has been slightly overestimated over time. In comparison to wind, you are more likely to have a low solar year, overall capacity solar year, than you are a low capacity wind year. So what you can do is just kind of lower your expectations then on a return, and say, your model is saying you're going to produce 960, take 95% of that number instead of 100% of that number, and then you build yourself in a little bit of cushion. What it does, you can't get as much for financing, or maybe the return for the equity player isn't as good, or maybe the cost for the power is a little bit higher, kind of how you put in the bucket, but that's one way to get around it. But yeah, there's not much you can do. I have a 50 kilowatt system on my farm. I was hoping that there'd be a lot more sun. The last couple of months have been pretty bad. So I think I produced more in March than I did in April. Yeah, so then, these are some challenges for a system like this. because the system is smaller, it is more expensive than would be like a 2 megawatt project, and even connecting the system to the grid, you would have, you know, somewhat similar cost of whether you're connecting a 50 kilowatt project or a 2 megawatt project. So then, you know, your cost per watt, if you would, to build the smaller project is more expensive because you have less kilowatts or less watts to disperse that cost over. For private equity, a lot of private equity is in the 12% range. You can get some public equity. There's a few guys that are out there. This might be a little bit of a small project, but there's a few guys like Greenbacker that are out there that are getting more public money or more stock market money, and they have a little bit lower return expectations in the 10 or, you know, single digits for equity. That's kind of where that is. For what it's worth, you know, this has got, with zero savings to anybody, this is about a 12 and a quarter. This is not cash on cash, so this is after tax benefits, but not after you then pay taxes on the out years when you're actually producing or making money. So that's worth probably about 2%. So this is probably about a 10% return for an investor as it stands, without being able to offer really any savings other than the fact that you're doing something good for the community or doing something good for the environment. Which kind of summarizes where this is at. Real quick then, 3 potential options. I looked at a bunch of different things that the county could do, trying to do some rooftop solar, based on a couple of the different other parcels that you guys own. It becomes it's complicated, and it's tough to overcome then the fact that you guys are also then paying, you know, like demand and the lower rate, like call it 6.5, 7 cents plus demand, and as I said before, you really can't get rid of the demand. And so on a rooftop system, the generation is less because the modules are flatter, and then you end up with snow cover in the winter. That's one big advantage to doing a ground mount system, is you get a steeper pitched module, snow sheds off of it. So that really doesn't work very good. I think the best way to try and to be able to do something is to create a construct where, you know, either the city owns it, and everybody in the community just appreciates the fact that, you know, Caledonia did some solar. There's a few other cities around Lanesboro, for example, that have now put in some small systems or are putting in some small systems. It's becoming more popular. Another option is for the school or the county to do all of 500 kilowatts or split it up some way or another. But in that scenario, in order to do over 40 kilowatt, there would have to be some agreement made between the city municipal and the county or the school entity in order to allow a net metering scheme that's over 40 kilowatts, because outside of net metering it'd be difficult to make something like that pencil. And then in those scenarios, you know, the county or the school could save a little bit of money because they're paying some more money on top of what's in that model. So that's kind of where you could create some of that savings and maybe save 10 or 15% as the school or the county. Helpful? It's a lot of information to,
But in this
to
scenario,
digest.
In this scenario, looking at this, the county, the city, and the school don't pay taxes.
Yep.
So
Do they get the tax
the
credit?
tax credits and the credit from depreciation,
Yeah, so what you would do in all these scenarios, you would find a sponsor that would write a power purchase agreement or a lease agreement, at least for the first 5-6 years, because that way then the sponsor can probably pass on, you know, 90% of the tax value can be passed on to the school. So say it's $1 to build, you could either do a prepaid lease, which would be even better, but then it'd cost a lot more. The entity would have to, the county or the school would have to come up with $400,000 or something like that to do a prepaid lease. But if you leased it, you'd subtract out the cost of capital that the sponsor has to have, but then the sponsor at the end of the day can pass on the ITC and the depreciation savings because they would take that themselves. So you're effectively cutting probably 30% out of the build cost. And you could do that either for under like a PPA scenario for 20 to 25 years, or you could do it under a lease scenario, which is about 5 to 6 years, depending on how conservative the tax council is for the sponsor equity on when the recapture period is from the IRS. It's known to be about 5, but some guys like to push it more to 6 or 7. And so you'd write a 6-7 year lease, and then after that, either the entity can, the school could buy it out, or the county could buy it out, or just extend the lease, can continue it on under the same construct, which would then basically be a PPA.
So, the panels itself, they're 25-year life basically, or? is there-
Yes, so most modules are the same. You get a 25-year, you get a 10-year workmanship warranty,
Yep.
a 25-year generation warranty, and that generation is, it has a degradation scale,
Yeah.
and most start at 97% of nameplate. So you had a 100-watt module, they guarantee you 97 watts out of the box, and then it's about a 0.7 degradation over time, which gets you to a 25-year rate of about 80% of the nameplate. And that's really fairly consistent across the board with all modules. LG makes some much higher priced modules, and they come with a little bit better warranty. But in some cases, you also just have to ask yourself, how important is that warranty in 25 years? Because who's to say that the module manufacturer might be in business in 25 years? And you can say, oh, that's bad reason, but you can also equate it to other things in your life too, whether it be particular lawnmower. Some tractors, whatever. Like some of those different companies have all gone out of business, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where you end up. So.
There's so much I'm almost don't know what to ask, but it's county land. Okay, so if we were to decide to take 4.5 acres, first we'd have to find a sponsor or that would partner with us to use the land but build the system.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that the sponsors that were part of, like the Lanesboro project and the dairy group, is it New Horizon or the Organic Dairy?
Organic Valley.
Yeah, Organic Valley. It's possible that those guys would be able to help find a sponsor, or maybe even roll it in. And so the easiest is just to reach out to a couple different people. Or you can just do an RFP. If you made a decision that you wanted to go forward, you could do an RFP, like a request for proposal, and just put it out to some different entities. Like SoCor, for example, they're now owned by a bigger entity, but they're out of Chicago. And they did I want to say like 19 megawatts around a bunch of different sites in Minnesota and Wisconsin with Dairyland Cooperative. And so it's something that they might still be interested in. It's maybe a little bit small from them, but 5 years ago they were building 20 kilowatt systems on top of Walgreens. So it still might be something that they're interested in. And they would then, be the developer and the sponsor, because they do both. They develop and own these assets long term.
Okay, the other, again, if we were to pursue something like this, I'd like it to be a benefit to Houston County, not necessarily a benefit to the city of Caledonia, even though Caledonia is in Houston County, but, I'd like to see the rest of the county gain some benefit. Is there any way financially that could occur? Can we?
I think the biggest thing you could do is if you could structure a deal with the city where the city allowed you to, net meter above the 40 kilowatts, and so do like a 500 kilowatt system on that. It would just lower your overall energy costs as the county.
As a
probably
pool,
not, it's probably not, yeah, as a
everybody's
pool.
used, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would really only come from these buildings, but I'm sure these buildings could, you know, consume a fair amount of that energy with the jail and all that. It's possible to reach one step further to My Energy and ask My Energy if there's something that they could do, and then we could look at, you know, other buildings or properties that are owned by the county within My Energy service territory and try and do something with My Energy above and beyond the city, but then again, that would allow maybe some benefit where it allowed you to use something outside of the city of Caledonia to help, you know, kind of offset those hours. But again, that would have to be then, you know, a multi-layered construct where you get both the city and My Energy to agree to something that's outside of what's actually written law. Which is fine, they have the right to do whatever they want. But
The net metering is the key thing there.
net metering is the key, and net metering is the difficult one. The difficult one. Like if you're in Xcel Energy in the city, it becomes, or even, you know, down here where there's some Xcel territories, it becomes pretty easy because you just figure out roughly what take your last 3 years worth of energy bills, add it all up from a kilowatt hour perspective, divide it by 3, put that into the system as what your goal is to produce, and then, you know, you build a system according to that, and then generally speaking, on a good year, maybe you're overproducing a little bit and you have to sell a little bit of energy back at wholesale, but for the most part, you're offsetting all of your costs with all your kilowatt hour cost, not your demand, but your kilowatt hour cost you'd be offsetting with what you produce. But unfortunately, it's tougher to do that outside of Xcel.
So based on your presentation, your example model, if you can work out an arrangement with the city and or My Energy as far as the net metering, this shows a $664,000 cost of the project. That's if we don't have a sponsor. What would the cost be? I mean, how much would the sponsor pay versus what is the out of pocket for the county or the school?
The county and the county, the school, the city wouldn't have to pay anything for it. And you guys wouldn't want to pay anything for it, call it upfront, because you would want it to all go through a sponsor so that the sponsor can take all the tax benefits out of the project, which allows
Because we're a
them to
public
then,
entity.
yeah, which allows them, you know, to pass on the lower cost of the energy. After the recapture period, 5-6 years, then it's kind of your choice if you would want to, you know, buy the system outright and run it, or just leave it in a lease scenario or a PPA scenario for 20 to 25 years, in which case there is no cost to, you know, you guys as the off-taker, because the sponsor is bearing all of it, and what you guys would just be paying the sponsor for the energy instead of paying the city of Caledonia for the energy, or portions of the energy is how it would work. And then you'd hope that, you know, we could come up with a construct where you guys are saving, you know, 5 or 10% or something like that on your energy bill by, or at least over those kilowatt hours, not across the whole energy bill, but over the kilowatt hours that are produced, that, you know, you guys can own those kilowatt hours for less than the kilowatt hours that you would have to be buying from the city of Caledonia.
Are you aware who the sponsor is in the Waynesboro situation?
I have it in an email. I got some emails from Tess, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
So if we did the sponsor package, like you're saying, then it becomes a lease of the land to the sponsor.
Correct.
Of the 700 to 1,200 of the sounding is like it's back to 700 on this based on size.
Yeah, and all of that comes down to, you know, similar to the, you know, everything has, you're punching a bunch of numbers into a model, and you have a lot of levers. So you could say, okay, we want more money for the land, but then you just have to pay more money for the power. And so maybe then you're getting $1,200 an acre for the land, but you're really not saving anything in the power.
Power.
You know, if you lease the land for less, then you should be able to purchase the power that comes out of it for less.
And at the end of a 7 or 10 year lease agreement with the sponsor, what's the buyout typically? I mean, is there a percentage of cost?
It's probably, after 5 years, I think you could probably get to like a 50% buyout cost.
So
Something around that.
$332,000 to
Yeah.
buy it out. And then recover your 332,000 based on this scenario.
It's probably,
How long does it take to recover that 332?
just as the sponsor, I mean, you could probably recover it in 5 to 7 years. If you're not taking, you'd have some debt in there, but,
Well, I'm going on a
probably
basis
from the
that
county, it's probably about 15 years, I suppose, all told, to recover all your costs, and then you start saving
that's
some money. but
recover
it
the full
depends.
664
No, the three.
or the 332?
The 332,
Yeah.
because
So
now you
after
would
5
take,
or 6 years, we pay 332 plus another 15 to recover the 332.
no, it'd be 15 years probably total. I don't wanna commit to too much because it, you'd
Right,
have to
I
like
understand,
calculate it all out.
we're
but-
just talking
but
throwing
I'm a-
numbers
but-
around it.
But I would assume that you could probably in 15 years, if you're just paying for it and it's not debt and some other, you would have to do a bond, some stuff like that probably, but it's probably about 15 years from when you would start the project to when you would have everything paid off. And that's assuming that you get good terms, I guess, from a sponsor.
So then you'd have 10 years of life
Yeah, I
to
mean, you would have,
create a gain.
you'd have 10 years of warranted generation life, but there's nothing, I mean, the modules are gonna produce, for 40 years, it's just,
It
they're no
decreases.
longer warranting the generation after 80, but, that degradation rate is like 0.7% per year. The modules are just gonna keep degrading at, going down, and at some point in time, then you just make the decision, do I repower, do I just abandon, tear
Right,
out the
tear 'em
project,
out or-
just continue to let it produce less and less energy over time. For the most part, like on the big utility scale stuff, like the projects that I'm working on, even though there's a 25-year generation warranty, we're modeling stuff at 40 and 50 years, assuming that, I won't be around to see whether or not it works, but, we'll be, selling the power merchant after the 25-year term of the PPA is up, and just making some assumptions that, well, eventually you'll decide, okay, the system's not producing enough anymore to pay for our O&M costs and marketing costs of the power and all that other stuff, so now we might as well just decommission the project, but it could be 40, 50 years that you keep producing energy.
The next question, with regard to the system itself, it goes into a meter and then flows back into the grid? Or,
Correct. So you're producing the energy and then it goes just the opposite of how you're consuming it at your house.
it's a
Basically.
reverse meter, so to speak, but
Yep,
we meter how much we're producing, that's where the agreement with the city or My Energy comes into play, because we're putting that back into the grid system, that's what they're buying,
Yep.
is whatever we're putting in.
correct. And if you would do it if you connect into your house, what I was proposing was just a completely separate service, just because it's easier, in reality, but it still kind of looks the same as if you're doing it at your house. At night, the meter spins forward, during the day when it's producing energy, it spins backwards. And kind of the same concept would work. You're being charged for, $5,000 of electricity in June, but the system's producing under this meter, the system produced $5,000 worth of energy that you're getting paid for, and the two bills wash each other out.
Right. So you said you did this on your farm?
Yeah, I put in a system last year on my farm. Probably will build another system on my farm this year, and probably build a couple more in the cities.
Yeah, I look at this as a,
But that's a different scenario because
I know, I understand
I'm
that.
buying it at, like,
But I'm
resi
saying,
rates and stuff, so
yeah,
it's,
this is a good deal for private landowners, farmers who are looking for extra income.
yeah, or tax. I mean, it's a
Tax
good,
credit,
yeah, I'm self-employed, so it's a good tax. It becomes kind of a better tax shelter than
right,
the Dow at the moment,
yeah,
or a better investment than the Dow at the moment.
yeah.
Well, 10 to 12% return on your money is a heck of a good investment as far
Yeah.
as anything else is concerned.
Mhm.
But you still got the situation of having to deal with the city or My Energy, or both.
Well, it
to
looks
get
like
that worked out.
from the county standpoint, we'd be better off if we were to sell the city some land or whatever than to.
The city may not be interested. I
Well,
think
I'm
most
just
of the
saying,
city's
you know,
interested.
yeah, right. It gets a little complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, like, I mean, My Energy, like, Dairyland
Just so you
is
know, we've
opening
got
up to solar more.
Just so you know, we've got representatives from the school, My Energy, and the city
Yeah.
here. So,
No, I get it. Like, Dairyland is opening up to solar more. They're gonna do 150 megawatts plus of solar, over the next few years. The one problem that all co-ops have is they're all members of a GNT, and, you know, they're basically a shareholder of that GNT, and so really the co-op, to some degree, the co-op and the co-op members is who's holding the debt on whatever coal-fired plant or whatever gas peaker plant or whatever wind or solar project that the GNT has bought into to some degree. And so most co-ops have pretty stringent rules on self-generation. So there'd have to be some discussion with, like, you know, with My Energy on how much maybe more My Energy could possibly self-generate to see if it's possible to build a construct like this where you exceed the mandatory 40 kilowatt net metering rule. But it's not impossible. I mean, the numbers are tight, but I do think, you know, if you took one thing that, like, doesn't work the best today is the fact that, yeah, the declining ITC, so, you know, the value, like the tax savings that you're getting, which would be like the tax savings that a sponsor is passing on, is declining, while the cost for the solar has kind of been levelized and is almost having a little bit of upward pressure because the ITC is declining and there's more investment, and then, you know, the tariffs, including even the last, you know, a lot of cheap products comes out of China, so even the last 30% or the up from 15 to 30 on the last round a couple weeks ago on tariffs against China didn't help anything on continuing to drive down the cost. But if you could get in, you know, maybe this year, get in somebody that could, you know, safe harbor through, you know, the rack, the tracker fixed tilt has kind of the least susceptible today for tariffs, and then possibly build it, you know, 2 years, 3 years down the road. It's possible you could take, you know, 20 cents off the EPC price, and that's where you would then find like a decent enough savings to really make the project worthwhile. And I mean, there's a lot of people on the utility side that are playing that game, but it's possible. I mean, you can get on a vessel in China a module for 21 cents that a watt that sells in the United States for 42 cents because of either, you know, the anti-dumping tariffs from 5 years ago or the 301 tariffs from 2 years ago. So it's a pretty significant, let's make sure it was mine. It's a pretty significant increase in cost. Inverters, like, Solar Edge is up probably like 15%, and you're probably like 30% higher now on inverters also. For a small project, or for a project like this, it's less relevant, because that inverter is probably only 4 cents, so the 30% tariff doesn't hurt it as bad as like a module that's, you know, 35, 40 cents. But that's one way to maybe help it is, plan it, do something today to lock in the business, and then build it in a couple of years when the tariffs have come down some on equipment to try and find the savings.
If you're losing tax benefit as you go,
Well, so what you can do is, how that works is they have a safe harbor concept where if you buy 7% of the cost of the system this year, and then have it delivered within 105 days, so you have to buy it by the end of the year, and then it has to be delivered, that product has to be delivered within 105 days of the purchase, then you can use that material to what they call safe harbor, as long as it's 7% of the project, and so you can push that forward to 2023. So you can buy today, install it in 2023, when the ITC is down to 10%, but get today's 30% ITC value, which is also extremely common. That's part of the reason why modules themselves probably over the last 6 months have gone up about 5 cents a watt in value, because a lot of people have ran out and bought, literally billions of dollars have been spent across sponsors to buy product to safe harbor for 21, 22, and 23. Guys like NextEra bought, they probably bought 5 gigawatts of inverters alone. So that's not helping drive down the cost. This discussion, to some degree, this discussion probably like a year and a half ago would have been easier, because the costs probably have almost gone up from a year and a half ago through tariffs and
Demand.
yeah. Even though the import costs were higher, material costs were higher 3.5 years ago, or 2 years ago. I mean, I'd be happy I can call a couple people, get the information to test and pass it on. If there's some, like SoCore, because I know they probably have a system that's not too far from here. Because I know there's around like 14 systems or something like that in Minnesota, Wisconsin that they built, a couple of them maybe. But it might be something that they would be interested in, and they would have, they're a good shop, and so they would have like the capability to help drive down some of those costs from either EPC side or financing costs and stuff like that, to try and get closer to finding savings. It doesn't cover the utility side hurdle of exceeding the 40 kilowatts, but
Right.
you're getting one step closer to reality.
Well, this has all been good information, and this is an informational meeting, and I don't know if the school or My Energy would like to say anything or have any questions on anything.
Ted, I got a question for you. At the substation, Wild Turkey 1, that's My Energy that's coming in there? That the city buys from you? The city owns the substation, but the power coming in, that's through My Energy? Okay. And that's the power that My Energy has bought from Dairyland?
Correct.
Right.
That's the one behind hotel. That used to be the
Yeah.
hotel.
So, I mean, the first hurdle, if the school or the city or the county wanted to do something, would be to see if we could get an arrangement with the city as far as that 40 kilowatt limitation exceeding that. Because this would have a bearing on what the city sells through their electrical department, because it would reduce their sales, because
Correct. It would reduce, I mean, the city has to charge, pick some percentage above and beyond what they're buying the power from My Energy from, in order to pay for the technicians that are making sure that the lights stay on in the city. And so under the net metering scenario, you would effectively be taking away that profit, if you would. It doesn't cost the city money per se. What you would be doing is it would cost them a little bit if they straight net metered. There would be a little bit additional cost, because they're paying you more for the power if they were buying extra power. But if all they're doing is netting out kilowatt hours, it doesn't actually cost any extra money for the energy, but now you just have less profit dollars coming in, or less margin dollars, if you would, to come in to pay for the technicians. So ultimately, you know, most likely rates might have to increase a little bit or something like that to cover that cost, or something to that effect, which is the negative side.
Or you do an agreement based on the over 40 that,
Yeah, well, that would be, yeah,
to compensate for the loss of profit margin.
yeah.
See, and the school, I think, could do it, because they own the property and could put in a system. On the 22 acres that we've got, that's ag, zoned ag, so we'd have to have there'd be a zoning issue as far as doing this on that property that we'd have to agree with the city on too. I would assume.
I would worry about the cost down the road, thinking about the heat pumps at the high school, which cost quite a bit to maintain and are at almost at their 20-year
Life.
life, and it's gonna be very costly to replace those, and the upside down. And I don't know if it's apples to apples or not, but
Right.
it's a comparison.
Sure, I mean, the cost in that model is probably about $3,500 a year of operations and maintenance costs. The standard inverter is warranted for 10 years, and then, you know, you can buy it for probably 30% of the cost. You could extend the warranty for 20 years. Depending on what inverter you're buying, I don't really think that it's a prudent investment to buy it up front, other than the fact that you're getting the tax benefits on it up front. You'd be better off kicking the can down the road, because it's highly unlikely that you're gonna lose all your inverters. I mean, they're built with a 25-year life expectancy in mind, or a 30-year life expectancy in mind. It's highly unlikely that you're gonna lose them on year 11 when the warranty goes out. That all depends on the sponsor's willingness to take on risk. But
You
the
never
costs
know.
are pretty low.
You
To
could-
maintain it, the costs are low.
You could get a sponsor and go a 20-year program. It doesn't cost you anything out of pocket, just generate,
Yeah.
say, $1,000 an acre as a rough number, and $4,500 a year generation for 20 years doesn't cost you anything, and the sponsor's got all the responsibility.
Yeah.
But you're still adding to the green aspect as far as getting away from fossil fuel by using the solar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's good I mean, there's the general good environmental benefit, but there's a fair amount of decent, even like marketing benefit that's gonna come out of it. I mean, I would be surprised if Lanesboro didn't market their little solar edition quite heavily. It's becoming, mainstream. Like, the closer you get to the cities, it's obviously a little bit different, but a lot of some of the outlying communities outside of the cities are really starting to scream at their local municipalities, and that they want more solar brought in, because it's a new lifestyle thing, and that is an expectation. So there's, even when it's hard to find the financial benefit to it, there are some other benefits that come from it, which is.
But you can work this out that your net benefit, the net cost over the long run is zero, or you're gonna gain something.
Correct. I mean, I don't think that
It isn't a big
I
brainer.
don't think it's worth necessarily spending extra money to do it.
Right.
I think it then becomes a question of, is it worth going down the path if you're not saving any money? And I think that that's where there's benefit and value in, the marketing and that you would get out of it. I mean, you could easily, say, hey, we're producing, 25% of the energy consumed in the city of Caledonia is now green energy, or 20% of the energy consumed by the county is now green energy, and there's some value in that. I mean, for the county administrators, if they get together at the Capitol once a year, it's pretty good bragging rights for the county administrators amongst their peers. So there's some benefits to it.
That's what you're talking about, marketing value.
What's that?
That's what you refer to, marketing value.
Yeah.
Well, and companies can advertise that they have clean energy and you see that everywhere from web hosting to pick a company.
I mean, snowpack, the county, Caledonia haulers, I mean, they could all, the city itself could find a way to leverage the value out of it.
The quality of life. Okay.
Any other questions?
I have lots of questions, I just don't know how to ask them.
I mean, feel free to, like, if you have I mean, I'll do my best. I spend a lot of time in an airplane, so, feel free to send stuff to test if you want, and I'll do my best to answer stuff via email or whatever it happens to be.
Appreciate that very much.
Thanks, Sean.
More just trying to, I don't know, provide, I don't know, I think like an unbiased opinion on it, because I don't really have anything to sell, so I can just support the industry and find the right people that can help support what you guys want to do. So
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Fascinating discussion, thank you.
thank you.
Okay,
I think in future we'll have to, do some investigation and talk with the city and My Energy and the school and see what works.
Well, yeah, and I definitely need in front of me, structure of who, when, how much, and,
Yeah.
just a lot to try to understand.
Yeah,
Do you guys got anything to say?
Yeah, I guess my biggest thing is,
you wanna come forward?
Casey, why don't you talk into the mic, yeah?
sit right here.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just state your name.
But, Casey Klug, Public Works and Zoning for the city of
Casey, can you
Caledonia.
hit the button? He turned the microphone off. Yep, there you go.
there you go.
Casey Klug, City of Caledonia, Public Works and Zoning. Commissioner Miller, you mentioned earlier about, kind of a benefit to the county as a
Correct.
whole. So, the more solar investment put into Caledonia is going to put a burden on Caledonia ratepayers with our system. The rest of the county residents are gonna definitely see a benefit on reduced utilities and stuff and such, but, the fellow who was just here at the presentation, he mentioned snowpack, Caledonia haulers, some of the big power users, that would have a huge impact on our revenue on our electrical side, so I think that's gonna be a very large factor for us to try to work out and look into.
Okay. I just didn't
Loss of
understand
revenue, you mean?
Correct,
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
I-
it's a large part of our budget, so.
yep.
Yeah. I was just questioning the flow. I don't know
Yep,
how,
Yep.
I mean, I'm certainly not against Caledonia, saving money or not losing money. I just, wanted to see a broader picture if there was one.
You bet. So
No.
my worry was that it's gonna put a very unfair burden on
The city.
Caledonia electric purchasers versus the rest of the
Okay.
residents in Houston County.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all I got.
All right,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Ms. Erke?
Craig Erke, Superintendent of Schools of Caledonia Area Public Schools. Yeah, I would just, echo what Casey was saying is that, we would, if we were to go ahead and do this, there would be some savings, but there would also be some cost increase on the other hand, so I don't know that, you gotta be careful, it's free money, look coming at you, what strings are tied to that, or, I think that's one thing to maybe look down the road and we can have that discussion later on, but
Right.
I think there's a lot of strings attached. The heat pumps at the high school is something that is very concerning to me, and I think that was a golden goose 20 years ago that, hasn't produced, I guess.
It's been a maintenance nightmare.
Yep.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chose?
Ted Schultz with My Energy Cooperative. The speaker made a lot of assumptions in the different business models, and he's not a representative of either utility and does not know the contractual arrangements between the two entities. And also, he kept referring that the project viability was based on this artificial net metering. Well, I can't speak for the city utility, but I know that if the project would be directed at, in my energy service territory, there would be no net metering for anything 40 kW or above. So that assumption would be off if you went that route. There's other avenues that we have that he didn't mention, that could possibly work for a project on a buy-all, sell-all arrangement. But the other thing, in the state of Minnesota, third-party ownership is not allowed. So if you have a third party coming into the city of Caledonia's service territory for their electric utility, an entity can't buy from a third party, they have to buy from the city. Now, the city can waive that, I imagine. Like I said, I'm not a spokesperson for the city, but that's the law. They have a defined service territory law in Minnesota. A third party cannot come in and sell product within that service territory. So, you know, we're certainly supporters of renewable energy. We own 3 projects ourselves and are building a 4th one this year. But you know, there's a process and there is interconnection standards and laws in the state of Minnesota that have, you know, dictate that relationship between consumers and utility. And that's what we need to follow. And if the county would like to make application for a project with My Energy, we're more than welcome that, and can have further discussions, you know, if the commissioners would like to, you know, just test the waters and see what is possible. But I guess I'll leave it at that.
The programs, now you're doing a 4th one, a 4th project, not a program, but a project. Do you get investors to buy into that, or are you doing that independent?
No, this one is on our own, but here again, we're not just contracting or getting power from Dairyland Power. We also, because of our Alliant Energy acquisition a few years ago, we have another power supplier, and in that arrangement, we can own generation for that part of our service territory. So
That's in Iowa?
no, that's in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, okay.
That's in Minnesota, but here again, that's a different wholesale power relationship. We do have an all requirements contract with Dairyland Power that we have to buy all our power from them, but then there's certain caveats and policy that allows for some other arrangements for renewable energy. So we do have some alternatives that we can and are using.
So the fellow Sean mentioned that Dairyland is gonna be doing a fair amount of solar energy projects in the future?
Well, they contract for the production. They're not actually owning any of the projects. They just announced a few weeks ago a 149 megawatt power purchase agreement with a developer in Wisconsin.
Okay.
That's typically, they don't own a lot of the generations, mostly contractual.
Okay. All right.
Be happy to entertain any questions in the future though that the commissioners would have on regards to that too.
Gotta let all this sink in a little bit before you come up with a question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys coming too.
Yeah, extremely helpful.
Okay, I guess we'll move on. Action items?
Yeah.
There's tabled action on the exchange of property. Bob, you got more on that, or?
Well, I guess I was gonna ask, Jack and Fred if, you know, you had a meeting with, or engineer with regard to this?
Yes, we did.
I'm looking for
Jeff,
the
yeah.
numbers I sent you. I was having trouble finding the email this morning when I was talking to Commissioner Johnson. Off the cuff, it's essentially when we looked at the costs associated with the 3-acre parcel purchase in our adjoining site, the cost of the land swap and purchase, as well as the additional cost of the 9 parking space spot that we were looking at, and then the 10 years worth of the lease expense of the additional parking spaces, that totaled to about $105,000 of expense. And then compared to the utility cost and road access cost to be able to build on a portion of the 22-acre parcel was about $400,000. And those numbers are pretty rough based on not sitting down and actually designing out the cost of connecting the soil and water, or power and sewage and water out there. So that cost can vary quite a bit. I think that estimate was a 25 to 50% swing. So that's one of the things that we worked on, was coming up with those numbers.
So from a financial point of view, acquiring the 3.2 acres for the swap financially is a lot more amenable to the project than going out to the 22 acres.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus, like Yvonne had said earlier in the public comment, the board had a few years back agreed to the existing site for the facility. The engineer has talked to us before with regard to, by acquiring that 3.2 acres, it reduces to a certain degree some of the grading that has to be done on the existing site to make it feasible or functional as far as the new shop is concerned as well. There is some grading. I mean, we have to put a pond down below to control drainage and whatnot, but it would save the county
It would just give us
someplace
some
in the
more room.
neighborhood of $35,000 to $70,000 in grading costs approximately, and it gives us room for storage and to make the sites more usable. Plus gives us a second access to the county shop property, like at fair time or when there's something going on at the fairgrounds, so that we don't have to deal with as much traffic. Or move everything away from the shop for the week of the fair.
Commissioner Burns, can I ask one thing? These 2 parcels that you're talking about here, well, actually, there's 3.
3.
Do they total 3.2 acres?
Totals 3.2.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But the net effect of the swap and purchase is $70,000. The acquisition of that 9 to 10 space area along the street that goes out to Highway 4476 at 15 or 16 by 80 or 81 or 82, whatever it is, was someplace between $1,500 and $1,600. The lease was $1,500 a year, so although it's $105,000, the $1,500 over a 10-year period.
Yep.
Should we decide to do that, there is still 2 hoops to jump through. One, we'd have to put the lease agreement together with Mr. Rogish. In principle, we've already talked about it, he's agreed to that, but put it together so that the $1,500 a year, 10-year lease would continue if he sold the land to somebody else. The next owner would, that until the end of the lease period would continue. And then the second thing would be the city of Caledonia would need to have a public hearing and then agree to the change in parking from the lot that we have to the 10-year lease area for the 25 stalls. That would be an amendment to the conditional use permit that we have on the Meyer property now. Right now, it calls for it on the lot that we're trading.
So we've still got some hoops to jump through.
Well, I think the first hoop we have to,
That's pretty well.
yeah, But the first hoop is, we would make a motion to go through with the swap and the sale, the swap and the purchase, contingent on the city giving us the conditional use permit amendment, contingent on the lease agreement with Mr. Rogish, writing that up and being done with that. As far as one last item, if it costs $1,500-$1,600 to buy that 15 or 16 foot by 80 or 81 foot piece as a backup for additional parking for the Meyer building, since I couldn't lower my wages, I'll reimburse the county for the $1,500 or $1,600, whatever it costs to buy that parcel. So, I got a motion that I wrote up last night while I was laying in bed, but do you want to wait until Teresa's here for that?
I'm trying to think of some other county things you could throw in on.
It's only go one at a time.
I don't know that that would be necessary at all, but I appreciate the gesture. But just to, I guess, reiterate what Jeff said, our committee with Brian present pretty much came to a consensus that we would continue to pursue the current site with all of these issues that I guess confront us or that we need to deal with.
We did not have the information that Jeff presented this morning. We didn't have that written down on Friday when we were talking. It just people were writing notes.
Yeah,
and then Jeff and Brian got together and compiled their notes. And then Jeff sent out something to Jack and I can't remember when that came out. But remember, this meeting was just on Friday afternoon. So we haven't had a chance to really get anything written down and presented to the board yet, which maybe we need to do before we vote so that everybody sees it. Maybe not, but talk about that a little bit, see what you think.
I'm not against the purchase of the property, Rogish property, but I'd like to see if we were to do that, to put those 22 acres up for sale. I don't think we should be in the business of keep purchasing land and then not utilizing it. I mean, of course, we'd utilize it here for this county shop here, but I think we should strongly consider trying to sell that 22 acres.
Can't argue that.
The only cravat I would add to that would be that it's highly unlikely that we would get an offer on that 22 acres that would fulfill the legal requirements that we have of we can only take about so much less for the property than we paid for it. We're not going to get our money out of it. We asked at a meeting some time ago, we asked the county attorney, I think it was, Jeff was there too, what the number was. And I remember, I better not say what I remember because I did not write it down. I wrote it down at the time. I don't have the notes with me. So,
But what I'm
but
saying
anyway,
is
we might have a problem there. Don't
right.
get your hopes up. And we may not actually be able to sell it at this point because of that limitation.
But you don't know until you try.
I know, you don't know until you try, which is absolutely correct.
But I think that's a separate issue
No, I understand.
from the
Yeah.
I don't think we tie the one to the other.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we should strongly consider doing that.
We haven't made an amendment to the motion yet.
I guess, Fred mentioned maybe putting this in a more formal fashion, but I'm wondering if we want to wait another 2 weeks to vote on it then. I would like to get it moving if.
My motion would be pretty formal.
Okay.
But if you wanna wait till Teresa's here, I'm okay with that. But
No, I'm okay with you have a motion.
A quorum is a quorum is a quorum, so.
If you wanna pass one down to Jeff, I got one for you. So, my motion is to trade the parcels with Mike Rogish, that being the .58 acre parcel on Sunset for the like property next to the county shop, and to purchase the additional property next to the county shop, making the total acquisition 3.2 acres at a net cost of $70,000. The trade and purchase are contingent on two things happening. One, the county must lease space for Mr. Rogish to accommodate parking for 25 cars on what was the True Gas property. That lease being for 10 years at $1,500 per year, and continue if the property is sold through the term of the lease by the new owner. And two, the city of Caledonia must allow the Meyer Building conditional use permit to be amended, allowing the leased property parking to replace the parking that was on the property being traded.
There's been a motion made. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Is there any more discussion?
I just want to clarify a couple of things. I think I've heard the answer on the one. The first thing that needs to happen, I remember that Mr. Rogish has verbally agreed to that lease.
Yes.
Okay.
And I spoke to him again this morning, so we'll have to have Sam and his attorney will have to write up a lease agreement that covers the area in question.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This is
Now-
just a motion to move forward and all the legalities are all contingent.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, understand. And the other thing that I questioned on that, any idea the percentage of likelihood the city would go along with that? You don't need to say that. I just asked it. Doesn't need to be answered.
I think the concern is gonna be that it's a 10-year limit on the parking. And what happens at the end of the 10 years? I talked to Adam this morning. Casey, you got something to say to that?
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna say is that
Why don't you come up and say it?
Since you're still here.
I know the original term was 40 parking stalls, correct?
Correct.
And I know when Adam had measured up the main office building and divided by 200, I believe the 25 stalls is a shortfall to what you actually need.
I'm figuring there's 15 or 16 on the site itself,
Okay.
plus the 25 gives us 40 or
Okay, you do
41.
have a total of 40. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
That was my only,
Yeah, it maintains the
Concern,
right
make
number.
sure we had it, 'cause a lot of
Maintains the
that-
right number, because we're taking into consideration the stalls that we have on the Meyer property itself.
yep, we're good,
Well,
thank you.
depending on what the city council has to say
Correct,
about it.
correct.
Yes.
And just so you know, the city council has a meeting tomorrow night because they couldn't meet on Memorial Day. And I'm going to that meeting to discuss it. There won't be an answer because they'll have to have a public hearing in order to do an amendment to a conditional use permit, but
What time is the meeting?
6,
On the realm
City
of,
Hall?
city.
in the realm of discussion, we had also discussed at our committee meeting whether or not environmental study would be a part of the deal. Brian did some initial investigating, and a phase one study would be about $2,500. Phase two, if necessary, off of that would be an additional $5,000, and that would give us a good idea on any remediation necessary on the property we're acquiring, which is one of those potential unknown costs. Most of the land would not be disturbed. We wouldn't need to disturb it except for the area where the pond is going in. So most, if we were to find any contamination, depending on what it was, could be left intact and covered over. We wouldn't have to remediate everything. But the concern was knowing what we were getting into before we bought it.
Is that something that needs to be added to this, or can it be put on later? Because this is not the formal motion to actually purchase.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Do we need to add something about that testing?
Passing environmental study,
Yes,
I think it should be.
okay,
Just, so amend it to add the third condition then.
Yep.
yeah,
Because you never know what you might find.
Yep.
If we buy a hornet's nest, that could be really bad news.
yeah. The likelihood, as he just said and as Brian talked about in our meeting, the likelihood of getting into a real severe problem in that situation is pretty remote because of what we have to, because of what will actually be done there. But, better to know.
Brian, do you know a time frame? I mean, are these inspection people readily available, or?
I did ask that question. I know that historically when I've been on projects with environmental issues, they do get out there and do the studies pretty quickly when needed. So I would think we can get done pretty quickly. Do I think it can be done in 2 weeks? Probably not. Do I think we can get something started to get a good idea though in the next month? Yes.
Okay.
Phase one is essentially looking at aerial photos, looking at history of the site, trying to decide is there a potential for something on that site. They'll look and probably see some old vehicles stored out there and say yes, that there's some potential for something being out there. Phase two is going out there and actually putting some holes in the ground, so we would have to get approval from the landowner to go out there and do that.
Soil borings.
They might wanna, check the soil, they might wanna check groundwater. With our use, because of our classification, with what we're gonna be doing out there, I do think it's a real low risk of actually having something that's gonna prevent us from doing what we need to do on that site. Usually put rock on, or aggregate on top of in-place soils, that soil can stay in place. The biggest issue would potentially be bringing the material out of the pond area, putting that someplace, would it need to be covered up, would we have to haul it off the site? That area I don't think has as high risk of some contamination as maybe part of the west. Overall, I don't think it's gonna be a huge issue, I don't think it's gonna be a huge claim. In fact, but it has a potential.
Okay.
The motion we today, I'll make that one already, we can get this set up.
So, yeah.
I think it should be in there.
Right, so I would suggest an amendment.
I saw Jeff writing.
Yeah.
Do you have something there? I've got it very brief written
Yeah.
down.
So I would just accept a suggestion amendment of a third condition, which would be favorable results of a phase one and potentially phase two environmental study. That way, you don't have to have it all
Yeah.
clear. We can evaluate the results once we have them.
I will propose that amendment to the motion.
I will accept that amendment to my motion.
And I'll second the amended motion.
Any more discussion on the motion and the amended motion?
Let's see, do we need to vote on the amendment first?
Well, I think it's added on, so.
It's added,
yeah.
okay, bingo.
Any more discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign? Motion carried.
All right, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you. Discussion items. Administrator updates.
Let's see, we've got June 7th, we will have Enterprise out here to kick things off. We're still waiting on arrival of vehicles. There's not a lot of updates there yet. And a couple reminders, we've got the 3rd of June is the district meeting up in Winona. And I think that's what I have for right now. We will, I'll get with Commissioner Burns and approach the city to discuss the conditional use permit aspects.
EDA meeting tomorrow, right, at Wild Rooster?
I'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. Fred, you wanna start with commissioner reports.
The meeting tomorrow, the EDA meeting tomorrow is the 10 o'clock in the morning, not 10:30 as we talked about a week ago, but 10 o'clock at Trinity Church in Spring Grove, the farmer help meet type of meeting. And the first meeting that we had, that group had, spent more time talking about the immediate concerns, the very real stress that people are experiencing, and ways of helping folks cope with that and getting some communication going. And this meeting will be a little bit more geared toward the idea that the potential for agriculture in Houston County is more than just your commodity, your large-scale commodity price things that we normally do. We have a lot of other options as to how people can stay on the land and run their operations and find supplemental income from the things that they can do themselves rather than the traditional taking an off-the-farm job. That's going to be the basic thrust of tomorrow's meeting. Mike Cruz has, through his work as an extension educator, has access to a lot of information through the university on those kinds of things, and Allison has some through EDA also. We are, just a side note, we are asking those two people to do a lot of extra work. And at some point, that may come back to bite us a little bit, because we may wind up asking somehow to enlarge those positions. We've talked a little bit about it. That's as far as it's going at this point, but be aware that that's part of it, that those people are spending a fair amount of extra time, along with some other people.
Can I ask
I'm
a
done.
question about that?
Go ahead.
Are we allowed to have more than 2 commissioners at this meeting?
I've noticed, yeah, I put out public notice for this meeting.
Information purposes.
It was actually a series of 3 meetings. This meeting, the marketing mornings meeting on Thursday at the Wired Rooster, and then also Friday's meeting with the solid waste over in La Crosse, excuse me. Yeah.
And the other meeting that I would talk about that's also EDA related is 7 o'clock in the morning on Thursday at the Wired Rooster.
I've got 8.
7.
Well,
At
I'll
7?
come at 7, you come at 8, we'll see who's
Okay.
right.
Well,
I'll either get a lot of extra coffee drunk or you'll be late,
okay,
because they hold that meeting to an hour pretty much.
I've changed it to 7.
I changed mine to 7 also. In this case, we sit for an hour.
I don't, well, we'll have good coffee.
coffee.
I don't remember the specific topic of that meeting, and I didn't get that folder thrown in my briefcase this morning.
Social media marketing, if
Yeah.
I recall
There
correctly.
we go.
Yep, so I remember Allison talking about that, social media. Is that it, Fred?
I'm done.
Did
Okay.
you want to do finance?
I'll let you do that.
Okay, Bob?
I got 2 meetings to report on then. One was the County Justice Center meeting with the judge and the various people in the county justice system. 3 things that we talked about. One is scheduling issues. They're trying to figure out how to schedule so that they don't run through the noon hour and make everything work. And then there was an issue with regard, they talked about Safe at Home and the Safe at Home program, that when you have a victim that is in the Safe at Home program, they change their address, and all their mail and all their information and stuff goes to a different mailbox and then is forwarded to them. And there was some issue, some discussion as far as what happens if they get pulled over by an officer for any kind of violation or any kind of issue. Where do you live? And they don't have to tell them. So it gets to be a kind of a hassle when you're in that type of a scenario. So there was discussion about that. And then the biggest thing was court electronics. They don't work very well. You can't have, like, they want to separate people, so they'll have people in a meeting room and people in the courtroom, and then they want to interconference back and forth, but it doesn't work. And then a lot of things when the new system was put in that aren't functioning properly. So they gave an example of a person who is in Fergus Falls at a facility, because that's the only place they could find a bed for that person with their particular issues. When court time comes, we have to send somebody 600 miles to go get them, 600 miles back for maybe a 1 hour or less court appearance, 600 miles to bring them back up, and 600 miles back again for that person. So we're paying 2 days, plus 2 nights, plus the room and plus the board. If they had the system working, they could do it by teleconference. I stopped and talked to the IT department about that. They are working with the people that put in the system. They're supposed to come the 5th of June and try and get this worked out so that everything's working again, but that was one of the complaints about that. Then the other issue was we had our finance committee meeting this morning with Carol and department heads.
I found my notes, Bob. I couldn't
Okay.
do it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
This is a shared committee meeting.
Fortunately, it's shared because I stuck my notes in my briefcase and then I couldn't find them, and so I passed the buck to Bob. But anyway, one thing that the board needs to be aware of, since we have actual business meetings twice a month, we do have a problem with the scheduling of some fairly large payments on construction projects. We have been in the past seeing those sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes it'll be this summer you might run into a situation where you've got $1 million payment. And we have been seeing those payments as they've come and looking at them, and we don't necessarily formally approve them, but at least we're aware every meeting that they're there. Well, with business meetings every other week, there is a 35-day payment window from the time that the bill is presented at the highway department until she's got to pay it, and sometimes it may not work out to where we will see those amounts at a regular business meeting, and they'll have to be paid, or should be, otherwise we pay interest. So the concern was, we don't actually, Carol, you check me to make sure I said this right, we don't actually formally approve the total payment until the contract is completed. We just see those payments as they come by. And is that okay if we don't see it until it's actually been paid? It's not a formal approval, but anyway, we need to ask that. Does Carol, did that, okay, add something?
You actually see the payment that's going to be made on a Tuesday when there is just a work group session on the listing that you receive on Friday. So it's not that you wouldn't see it before the check goes out, but
Yeah.
it's not an actual where you go through the list here.
Yeah, it's not a board meeting where we can actually ask a question about it and
Right, but
yeah.
you receive the listing of the payments on Friday, and you would be able to address
There-
Following Tuesday.
questions about a partial, $1 million partial with Brian or Sheila. But they're not ones that have to be approved by the board before payment. That's just the final on a project, and that has to be approved by the board.
Okay.
And those, the board sees those claims every Friday
Yeah.
already as is,
Right.
Yeah,
and will continue.
it's just we
It's
don't,
just we have a lot of projects this year,
Mhm.
and a lot of payments that are gonna start within the next 30 days, just so that you're aware of it.
okay? The other thing that came up there was the maintenance, I've switched gears completely. I'm talking about the enterprise rental agreement,
Okay.
okay? The maintenance that's done in some departments is considerably different than the maintenance that's done on vehicles in the highway department. Highway department has been doing and plans on continuing to do a lot of the maintenance on the vehicles that they have out there. The issue is we want to make sure that the people that are doing the maintenance and the people that are recording that maintenance get together to the point where the maintenance that they do is also logged into the enterprise system so that we know, or whoever's supervising that system knows in reality what's actually been done on those vehicles.
Yeah.
And there's a little nervousness in the highway department at this point about how that's gonna happen and make sure it does happen.
Right. Yep, we've had those discussions with them when Enterprise's representative was out here, and that's not unlike, I mean, there are other counties that do a lot more maintenance on their vehicles than we do. I mean,
Yeah.
ours is pretty limited to oil changes and, tire changes and things like that. So they have solutions for doing that and ways to record and do that. Yeah. So it's just I would put it more as a concern for not having done it that way. It's that anticipation of a change.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not a showstopper. It's not a problem. It's just a matter of changing how we record it.
Matter of adapting to change,
adapting,
and change is always, oh, really?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Did you have something else on that? Olivia,
Well, the MCIT insurance premiums are going to, the refund from CIT is gonna be allocated to the departments percentage-wise as to how they paid in the premium in the first place, rather than all going to the general fund, just the fund. Not each department, but each fund, based on the percentage they paid in for coverage, they get that percentage of the refund back.
Right.
minor bookkeeping.
Just a bookkeeping thing, but at one time, the board had wanted to put it all into the general fund for specific purpose, and now it can't.
The auditor blew the whistle on us, in my understanding of what happened there.
DHS, the auditor.
Whatever. Okay, minor.
Jack, you have anything?
Came Monday for a meeting with John Lisa and Heather Myrick to talk about the mosquito potential issue, and through a mix-up, we didn't have the meeting where the person we needed to talk with didn't show, and got complicated. But the gentleman that has done this for the county for years, retired, he suggested somebody, and that's where the communication fell apart. So Heather had called me and said they were doing a follow-up, so I haven't heard whether they in fact met with the gentleman or not, but be aware we will have mosquitoes. There's no doubt about that. So
If the water keeps rising, we won't have. The water will just keep up with it.
right. The other one was that I had a planning meeting. I'm on the planning committee for Hiawatha Valley again, and been doing quite a bit of meeting with Hiawatha Valley because of the changeover in the administrator and some things that just need to be updated and coordinated, et cetera. So that was a good meeting. And then I have a question. I have June 6th. I have 10 a.m. and state, but my notes are not very accurate. Does anyone have anything on June 6th?
Yes, if I've got this right, the assorted county surveyors from throughout the state of Minnesota will be meeting at the Houston County Historical Society at that time.
Oh,
That's what I've got.
I do have
that's
historical
right.
building written down, yeah, but,
Yeah, didn't Dick Walters bring that up at?
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know that they need my input there.
But in any event, that's what I've got at that time,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm
All right.
assuming that's
Yeah,
same
Eric,
thing.
Eric is hosting their state meeting.
Okay, that's all I have.
Yep.
Eric brought it up at a meeting that I was at, I remember
Okay.
that, land use meeting, he brought it up.
I don't really have anything, just that I wanted to mention that I was at a memorial service yesterday for the veterans, in Houston, and it was really good. We have a member from Houston was part of served on the USS Hornet. His name is Elmo Wojan, and so that was kind of special. He got to ring the bell for the people who passed away, the veterans who passed away this past year. So it was really good service. So
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Eric, because I neglected. Last Thursday night was the ribbon cutting, grand opening of the LaCrescent Event Center and Motel. Jeff, you attended. I unfortunately had previous commitments in Rochester that I could not cancel. I did go yesterday to the Memorial Day event. Because of the inclement weather, the new
yeah, we had
event center already was used. They had the band inside, which, if any of you had been in the old American Legion building, you would not have had a crowd plus the band in there. This worked out very well. So it was a very, very nice ceremony and a very nice facility in which it was held. So.
and I appreciate your email, Jeff, on
Oh, thank you.
what you said about the Memorial Weekend and what it really stands for. So, anything else?
If I could add one thing, we, last meeting on the agenda, it went through, was brought up, on the consent agenda, it was brought through about the sheriff's posse and that action, which was great, but it didn't give us a chance to highlight
Right.
what the sheriff's posse has been doing to support our sheriff's department. And so I just wanted to bring that up, put that on the record, as well. The sheriff's posse has raised money separately, independently for, and recently just purchased a drone system. That's not the the little toy style. This is a close to $20,000 drone that will be augmenting and available for search and rescue operations, as well as any other potential operation that would support the sheriff's department. And so I think it's important to highlight their contribution and their activity to the county.
Absolutely.
Yep. Good thing.
I just wanted to note that I attended the memorial service in Preston at the Veterans Cemetery on
Oh,
Sunday.
yeah.
Very impressive.
Very good.
It's just an amazing area.
Yep.
And they had chairs set up for 300 people, and I would say there was probably maybe another 100 that had brought lawn chairs.
Great.
Very nice.
Anything else? If not, yep, close with public comment. Is there any other public comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Meeting adjourned.